thank you so much for all of those presentations. It's really nice to see what you've put together in your time here, and it's quite very impressive. So well done. How might what you've learned here apply to your own setting or your own ongoing interest in work and behaviours?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been so interesting studying the Lake District because I do see so many parallels with what I've been studying at home as well. I recently did a project on predator coexistence and some of the conflicts between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and farmers there. And it really reminded me of the rewilding versus shepherding kind of ethic that's going on here. Someone in that project described there being a conservation bias in farming and a farming bias in conservation, anti-farming bias in conservation. And I've definitely seen that emerge as a theme. And so I think that seeing the efforts to create a balance and compromise here has taught me a lot about listening to all perspectives and kind of how to mitigate some of those conflicts and manage what happens when you have like polarized views emerging. So I've definitely gained so much just even in that regard. So.
Yes, you got a similar thing. I think, well, not similar, but kind of getting like all sides of the perspective and actually being able to talk and like invest with everyone. We've talked to so many different trusts, farmers. I feel like we've gotten a very good like whole sense of, well, I mean, obviously not entire sense, a good sense of like what's going on here. So I think it engages you with your environment where you are, and like I think that's why this trip's been so enriching, being able to like come here and learn more than like the average tourist for 6 weeks in the Lake District. And so I think going back home, I'll know how to engage with my environment. Like I'll make sure I know what paths I need to explore, like who I can like talk to, and like find like nonprofits and stuff like that. So I think it kind of just opened my eyes to how to engage with an environment better.
I think in a way that's similar to what Fletcher just said, something that I really got to appreciate over the course of this abroad is the complexity of the Lake District and how everything ties in with everything. And I think coming from a background that is not the same as a lot of people on this abroad, that appreciation for complexity was something that was a good like foot in the door for me. And I'm not a bio major and I'm not an English literature major. So I can take an appreciation of English poetry back home with me that I never knew about before. And an appreciation of ecology that I never knew about before, that I've never taken an ecology class like some of these other people have. So I think I learned a lot, not just from being here, but from taking classes and being immersed in subjects that I, at school, normally would not have been immersed in.
Yeah, for me, I think one of the biggest things that I really appreciated is the sense of a natural rewilding, in the sense that it's not based around like a human-driven goal, or like it's not being driven just by humans. It's really like humans setting the scene, but then allowing nature to take itself and guide itself past that. And that's something I really got a bigger appreciation of, especially through projects like Hoswalker and Riverdale. It's just really cool to see how they've been shaped by nature and not by humans per se.
For me, I really enjoyed getting to dive into the deep end of biology studying. I was an English major, I've never studied science. And so getting a huge understanding of how an environment can change and be changed by literature, tourism, and just other ecological generations and tactics. This is what I'm going to take. Thank you.
I want to say thank you all so much for your presentations. Like you just said, they're incredibly impressive, and the amount of understanding that you've gained in the short time you've been here is really very marked. So a huge well done to you all, and really well done to Joe Mike for your programme here, because you've been exposed to such a wide variety of people and interests and views, and as you say, conflicting sometimes. And you reflected that so well, I think, and you've all come out with something slightly different in your presentations, which has been fantastic to hear, really well done. I wanted to ask you to do what has surprised you most about your trip here? What's sort of got a really wow moment for each of you?
I was really surprised about the amount of miscommunication and not communicating that's happening between trusts and farmers and shepherds and like bigger groups of people that are on two different levels of the problem. I feel like a lot of things could be solved if they just sent each other an email.
Really insightful.
Yeah, that was the most surprising thing.
Yeah, for me, I think the most surprising thing was seeing how deeply connected the literature was with the nature and how deeply it shaped the views. Because going into this, I have very little background in literature, and so I was like, well, it probably has some degree, but it can't be that important. But then coming in here and like reading like Wordsworth, Ruskin, Beatrice Potter, all their views on nature, and seeing how that has like deeply impacted the land has been really cool.
Great, I totally agree. As an ecologist myself, I feel exactly the same. Wow, literature is so important in so that's great.
I think something that surprised me, or a day that exemplified the thing that surprised me the most, was our day with Julia Aguilar. We did this exercise that demonstrates sort of how balanced and counterbalanced everything is in the Lake District, and how, you know, when people want to do things, there's all of these groups that have to agree on it, and that's not always the easiest thing that we found out. And I think something that surprised me was just all of those factors that go into everything you see here. There are so many groups that have to cooperate to keep, you know, the fells nice and tidy, or to keep sheep on the land, or, you know, the Schofield re-Whittleton River. There was probably way more groups that were part of that than I can name right now. So I would say that's something that surprised me.
Yeah, I love that. Your presentation, the fact that you really picked up on the complexity of the Lake District, and that's so true in this area. It's very complex. So well done for picking up on it.
I said the most kind of wow moment was the landowners. Because like back home, we're very used to it, at least I am very used to it, like the governments like owning the land and whatnot, which I think made it so, yeah, kind of more like complex when you have so many different landowners and they don't own continuous plots of land, like, you know, like there's little pockets, and like kind of like that dynamic with kind of how to work together when, you know, sometimes your pocket of land is different from like your other pocket of land, and you got someone in the middle, and I don't know, I think that kind of like that negotiation and kind of figuring out how to work together, if they do, was really interesting, because that's just not how it is back home.
You're absolutely right. That is a massive challenge in the Lake District. If it comes down to that land ownership and that working together or not. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's really important.
I think I was reminded of the importance of policy and environmental management being incredibly hyper-local. Like, this is such a unique place and has such a unique history and presents like, and it's just, you have to address like what's here, and you can't just have blanket policy that applies to like an entire, it's just a very unique place. And I think that with a lot of the people we've met with, they were working to address like this specific ecology, the specific habitats, considering the history. So that was really impactful to hear. And then also kind of like going off of Gabe's point, coming from environmental studies where like we took wetland ecology last semester and it was very like scientific, and it was really great to meet like Rob and Harriet and get to know some of these movements that are integrating arts and science. That was really inspiring that these two things are inseparable and intertwined, and just being reminded of that and getting to witness that was really incredible.
Oh, that's lovely. And you're absolutely right about Lake District being very unique, even in the UK as a whole. It's incredibly unique and complex, and that really presents challenges in terms of trying to apply in this area what are national policies for government or agriculture or anything. Basically, it's quite hard to fit here. So yeah, you're absolutely right. You've all picked up on really incredibly insightful things. So really well done.
I've got a question. Yeah, thanks everybody. You're now honorary Lake Districts. So, as you probably know, you know more about the Lake District. A lot of people live here now, speaking to so many people about the landscape. I wondered, before you came, you chose these preset questions or picked them or something of that ilk. I wonder if you had an idea about your answer to these questions before you arrived and whether they changed much along your journey while you've been here.
I can say for myself, yeah, I had no clue what it was going to be like over here. And my question for me probably changed over 2 weeks up until like a week and a half ago. I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to like actually have to like figure out. So I don't know, I kind of appreciate not knowing how like, you know, any of it actually works when you can get here. You can kind of just like learn, discover, and like, you know, gotta be flexible, you gotta be able to change this and that. So at least for me, I had no clue, and it definitely changed a good bit.
That sounded a really academic answer, actually. You don't necessarily know the question you're asking until right at the end.
All I knew was all I knew was water. And I was like, okay, go for it.
To be completely honest, I came and I knew I was doing political history. I was like, there's no question about what already happened. I'm just going to be able to sit up here and give a like nice report of everything that's already happened, and it'll be all done and dusted and hippie. And I think like with the questions, I think I gained an appreciation, especially if you're talking with John, who's a land manager back in the States, about how ecological history really plays into the decision making with a lot of land management. And you know, similar to Fletcher, I picked the question I'm using today like 2 days ago. It was changing so much. I think it also gave me a good appreciation for what academic life is like in the higher levels, because you know, you probably don't choose a question and stick with it the entire time.
I think possibly all of you come through this process, this manual process, with way more questions than you started with. And I think that's the level of deep listening you've had to go through, both to people and to the land, to the landscape. You know, you picked a really great 6 weeks, by the way. Well, or not, you know, we've had so little rain in 6 weeks, the land is crying out for it, so you know, it's nice to look at, but it poses its own problems.
Yeah, for me, I had a little bit of an idea what rewilding, what I thought rewilding was, but just like with everybody else, it's just like it's changed from week to week, even from day to day, just like what I was actually looking at, how I was even going to address the topics. So it was very much shaped, like, it was difficult because, like, as I mentioned in my presentation, like, everybody just has a different term that they like to use or a different definition of rewilding. That's just like finding a way to just combine as many as possible is very difficult.
Have you come up with your own term?
I really liked the forestry England term of just like restoring natural processes. I really like that.
My question, I know nothing about sheep, or did. And so I was like, well, I guess I have to keep sheep on the landscape because they're the mascot of the Lake District. But then I realized, oh my gosh, it's such a big problem. How do I pick a side? But then my question has sort of evolved into now picking a side and sort of tackling from an economic lens, because I could grab onto that and just start running with it, to show the validity of both sides, and that there's a bigger problem of tourism.
That's a really good tactic, by the way, Jen, to actually work with what you know personally and how you can actually work that into the problem you're looking at. So thank you for coming up with a solution. I think a lot of people would like to see a tourist tax in the Lake District. I think generally the government or England per se probably sick to death of taxes of one form or another. And maybe then what you create is an elitist park, you know, if you start to tax people coming here, when it should be the green lungs of the cities that really will set up, and you start letting the people through the gates who can afford to come and keeping out the people who can't and perhaps need it most. So every solution has another problem you create. Welcome to the adult world, as they say.
Well, before coming as part of our course, we read A Shepherd's Life, and that definitely shaped my expectations for the Lake District. Like, I was envisioning kind of small shepherding communities that provided local food source for everybody in that area. When I got here, I just wasn't aware of the impact of tourism and also the reality behind government subsidies and imports and exports. So I was envisioning this local food system that isn't really here, and that was a huge part of what I wanted to address in my presentation. So it definitely shifted and evolved a lot as I started to learn more about that and the reality behind it. And then reading English Pastoral, that's like the follow-up. Like, A Shepherd's Life is like the culture established, and then English Pastoral is kind of more environmental and addresses some of the problems that weren't addressed in A Shepherd's Life. So there's definitely a process. So, and lots to learn. So, but
You've had an insight into the journey of James Rebank as a person. You know, when we met him 12 years ago, the first time, he was more identified as a shepherd. He's still found the importance of a shepherd. He understands the importance of the land itself being sustainable, as part of him being sustainable in that landscape. So he's let go of the grip on the land, and some farmers that's still the need to do, and that's really helping the land and him personally, I think, in his own mental well-being. But how we feeding 40,000 people that live in this area is one thing. In the Lake District, feeding 16 million people who come here is entirely different question. Somebody said this once, that if every restaurant, pub, cafe that advertised Herwick meat was selling Herwick meat, it'd be like 30 million Herwick sheep going around these hills. You know, so they'll take on where they can that kind of tradition, that culture, and expose it wherever they can. But, you know, why not? Difficult, complex.
Another great presentation, thank you very much. You picked up on some really interesting points, and they're all so different. Am I right in thinking that your national parks are not generally lifted? If so, is there anything you would see that we could learn from you or vice versa in changing our national parks? I see lots of challenges probably on both sides of the matter.
I don't know if it's something that's, you know, objectively better or worse, but I would say the biggest difference that I see between the national park system in the United States and here is that in the United States, the national park system, there's this philosophy of like, we're going to make a trail and you're going to stay on the trail. We're going to be very upset with you if you leave the trail. This idea.
Janice, let's get everybody well.
Oh, it's something crazy. We have some national parks where like you walk through it and humans are only see or interact with 5% of it, or something absurd like that.
Still right, true.
And so the right to roam, I think, is a big difference here. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing or something to learn from.
Is it to do with the sort of management and being literate thing? What's the reason for such strict grants?
I think leave that to biology.
Yeah, it's,
No, I was gonna say I'm gonna leave it to the Americans.
The Canadians are very good at that.
Helps us.
it's definitely about management and biodiversity preservation, but there are a lot of problems being addressed within our management system as well. Like with California's national parks, there are claims of deforestation and kind of timber plantations similar to what have been in use here. And so I think it's also evolving and developing there in terms of policy and just ways forward. But I think space is a really big factor in it. Like there are just vast amounts of space where we can establish national parks. So I think that's a big difference here and something that makes like each side uniquely complex.
I would definitely say having at the entrance of the park a little kiosk where you pay a pound to get in, just to start generating revenue to fund infrastructure refurbishments and just have a system in place to fix the park when things are broken.
Yeah, that is, I think the biggest thing that, like the most implementable thing that I think that could be added, that we could introduce to parks here would be like what Jane said, just an entrance fee. Because in the national parks in the US, there's like, you can pay most parks in it's $20 or so normally for a day use. But you can also get like passes to like every national park for like $100 a year or something like that. So it's like just ways of like funding the actual work of conservation stuff that's not just like based on donation or like national lottery or something like that. So there's just like a constant revenue stream for the upkeep and management authority itself. But I'm also not sure where that money would necessarily go, considering all the like
It's how
different
it's
groups here.
connected is a big difference because
Yeah.
there's so many different roads leading in. And if someone is going to visit relatives, are they a tourist? Are they getting in business? They're not tourists, perhaps. So it's actually very difficult to find.
Who is a tourist?
And that is a big question to me about accessibility, just from my knowledge of the U.S. National Park System and who identifies with it as their park, right? There's a lot of privilege associated with that, a lot of social justice issues. So even just having to go through and potentially pay the pound or whatnot to enter excludes a mass amount of people in the United States, right? It's also the difference between the Lake District being so integrated and incorporated into society. We're talking about private land ownership and just having human civilization be integrated into the national park where that's not really a system, right? In the United States, they're excluded from one another, which could be part of the other issues that we're dealing with. But that's just an interesting question about accessibility and justice, looking at having to pay to get into the park. I was just gonna go off of like, when Jane ended her comments, she was talking about having to fix size. And I found that to be a theme through a lot of your presentations of having that idea of like, maybe it's even just a perception of binaries. And I saw that when you talked about having you could have either cultural heritage or the environment, or tourism, or clean water, right? Or, you kind of get presented and get thought that you have to give in to those binaries. But another theme, and because this is what I wrote, it's like all of my notes in here that I was writing from your presentation, was such themes of you each recognizing like the third space, right? Whenever you're presented with those binaries, you're always looking for the third space, not trying to give into that perception. And you talked about examples of holistic community partnering, organizations like bridging the gap between farmers and conservationists, place-based education, place-based partnerships, you talked about like reimagining the relationship of reciprocity. Some of these are sort of my words, right? It's like in what you said. But that's what struck me. You're like reimagining the relationship of reciprocity and culture within the environment, not separate, but as part of the whole. I mean, so those things are so aspirational and so inspirational. Alana, you ended your presentation with ways forward, and that's really what I was picking up from, because it was such a nice sequence that you all did through your presentations to paint this really vibrant picture of what you've learned throughout these 6 weeks for those of us that have kind of like went out, those of us here actually went out. So that was such a gift that you've just given. I think my question then to you is, if you're able to identify specific examples that you've observed of ways forward for proponents of quote, knowing that it's very complex and potentially lots of challenges, but insisting on that third space of, I was talking about collaboration and cooperation, right, those types of places. Do you have specific examples of those places, ways forward that are hopeful for the Lake District? And then I'll just like put it out there and then I'll take them forward to wherever we go, right, off in our lives. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like everyone we met with, like Robin, Harriet, and Hogg, and just so many of the individuals that we talked to recognized that space. Like Chris Hodgson, Hogg, even though he was like, he's been a shepherd, his family has occupied that land for generations, and he's so cemented in shepherding culture. He was excited talking about the ways that adult trees communicate to their saplings, and he grasped these like really emotive ecological concepts and was inspired by them. And so I think that a lot of people would look at him and say like, oh, he falls into one category of belief or of thought, but there is no monoculture of thought. Like everybody has these unique perspectives that they've been offering. And they so often do encapsulate that feeling of hope and of willingness to receive new ideas. And so that's been really inspiring.
You don't all have to answer that question.
What's your statement?
It's so interesting that you have such historical examples that you bring out, but then also contemporary. Like you're meeting with people that are advocating or looking for agency, for impact and things now, but also deriving things from the past and how perceptions now have been shaped by some of those things. So it's such a cool, vibrant, like dynamic picture and lens that you're providing. Mm-hmm.
I just want to join the rest of the panel. Congratulate you on 5 tremendous presentations. I mean, they were so clearly argued and followed the line of thought. The illustrations that went with them as well were really good. I can't tend to understand every graph that you show, but I can't wait to know more about it. And thank you also for bringing a bit of words into your presentation. I would know. I like to imagine that you're talking to some very powerful people who can affect change. And I'd like to ask you, could each of you say one thing you would like, practical thing, okay? You did it. One you would like to see more of, and one thing you would like to see less of. If you could. And then we've got 10 practical steps for addressing the questions that you have. Perhaps we should video this. Let's do Look at you. Don't start the camera.
No pressure.
Are we videoing anyway? Okay, well, let's get back. So, 10 ways forward.
I'd like to see more communication and less over explanation.
Who is the communication with and to and by?
The communication is between every party that is trying to save the landscape, between conservationists and farmers, is the biggest gap that I've found. And over explanation from conservationists trying to get farmers to, conform with what they want without considering, other ways of moving forward without taking the farmers out.
Yeah, I think I would really enjoy to see more collaboration between like groups of people who haven't traditionally worked together. So, like what like is happening with the RSPB, where they're working with like farmers and conservationists to like come to a conclusive middle ground. And then I'd like to see less alienation, kind of like less people saying, "Oh, this thing is terrible and should be completely gotten rid of." I don't think that helps anybody.
I think something that I would like to see more of is more integration, in that I would like to see more kind of what other two panelists have said, of people working together and it being more apparent. I think that we've gotten a really unique view of the Lake District over the last few weeks, and I think it would be, and we've been able to see a lot of different perspectives and nuances, and I think it'd be awesome if someone who, came to the Lake District for a holiday, like a school break, would be able to get a little slice of that, instead of like, I'm just gonna come up here with my friends and go swim in one Windermere, and then go to the pub and then go home. And I think something I would like to see less of is branding, in that I think, and this might be a personal preference, but I think it would be wonderful if people could come to the Lake District and expect it to be beautiful instead of expecting it to be a certain kind of beautiful.
I would like to see an improvement in how water is managed, less sewage, less potential for like, the algae blooms and stuff, because the significant increase is just caused by humans, and so I kind of want, utilities to like improve, like, I don't know, because I even went on their website and they kind of gave like a lot of like hokey-feely, like, oh, we're gonna be doing all this stuff, but then it's like, okay, but then every time it rains, there's these like massive like sewage dumpage into the lake, so I'd like to see an improvement in that, just some sort of like infrastructure and system that would handle the sewage better. What thing I'd like to see go away? I don't know. It's hard to say if something to go away, because then something else will become overbearing and brutal, most likely. There's always a balance.
We'd like to see those.
Yeah.
I'd like to see more incentivizing of creating spaces for biodiversity. And I definitely would like to see less polarization in the Lake District.
But also the thing that's coming across all the time, really, isn't it? More collaboration. Like I say, that's alone. You had a very long, which I don't know whether it's yours, but I think we should adopt it, niches for species. That's rather than, I think that, is that a thing, or is that something?
That's a thing,
That's
like
a
a,
thing.
yeah. I'll be, no, that's something I learned in ecology with Scott, so.
Wow. Well, thank you all. Thank you all very much. It's been a joy having you with us. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you for having
Thank you for hosting us.
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll leave those seat in the back. Conversation.
Yeah.